Now we're going to have an interesting conversation with someone who does not agree with us. So that should be fun and exciting. It's about a piece of legislation that's being proposed in Arizona that the Republicans are in favor of. It would make it illegal for government bodies to collectively bargain with employee groups. And that includes the cops, the firefighters, et cetera. And it would also end automatic payroll deductions for union dues. In other words, dramatically lowering union power in Arizona and taking away their ability to do collective bargaining. Now, one of the guys in favor of this is Nick Dranias. He is the Constitutional Policy Director for the Goldwater Institute. Nick, welcome to the Young Turks.
Hey, thanks for having me on. And it's only government unions, not every union. So let's keep that clear.
Absolutely. And I want the audience to understand this, too. I met Nick at a conference that we were both at, and we totally agree on the need for a constitutional convention. So there's some interesting agreements that we have. On this issue, we totally disagree. Let's talk about why you guys are opposed to it and why I'm in favor of it. Look, if you are a government union, or if you don't have a government union, you don't have collective bargaining, and you want to go into your boss and say, all right, I'd like a pay raise. You're going to have absolutely no ability to do that. The only way that any boss would take you seriously, whether it's a private or a public place, is whether you could bring everybody in together. I mean, haven't we gone through this in our history? And doesn't it make sense? And why do you want to take that away?
Well, there's no history of government employees being exploited in government because the interests of the government employer and the government employee are much more aligned than they are in the private sector, and that's because both of them want big budget increases and both of them want to spend more money generally. So the problem really is that taxpayers are uniquely vulnerable to government union collective bargaining because they don't have a seat at the table, and both people who are at the table have mutual interests that are also against the taxpayer.
But
so,
Nick,
so we believe that government sector union collective bargaining is really bad.
Nick, you're making gigantic assumptions about representatives. And look, I get it. I don't like a lot of our representatives, our politicians either. But basically, you're saying, well, obviously they're going to agree with the unions, and obviously the American people are not represented at the table. Why are those obvious? They are our representatives, and I don't think, for example, Republican politicians wouldn't agree with any of those unions almost at all. So why do you make those assumptions?
Well, let's talk specifics. In Arizona, the way collective bargaining works is it's literally secret. The negotiations are kept secret from elected officials initially. It's between the city manager and the city employees, both of whom usually rise through union ranks. And then they're presented to the city council alongside implied threats that they're going to unelect those people if they don't accept it. So the fundamental problem is there's a dynamic in the government where government employees can unelect their boss and basically fire them if they don't get whatever they want. And that gives the boss, the elected official, a tremendous incentive to shift the cost of excessive compensation to taxpayers.
You know, again, that's a lot of assumptions as to how these guys have this tremendous power and can wield it, et cetera. But when you look at the actual numbers, Nick, and they just did an analysis at Center for American Progress, David Madeline and Nick Bunker did. And, you know, this idea that, oh, my God, these guys have so much power and hence they've grown to be a larger and larger part of the state budgets is not true. When you look at total state employee compensation, including wages and benefits, they have not increased as a percentage of state budgets in the last 20 years. In fact, they have decreased. So if they had all this power, why over the last 20 years have their portion of the budget actually decreased?
Well, two things. You got to look at more than the percentage of the budget. You got to look at the hourly wage and benefits. And the Bureau of Labor Statistics of the Obama administration just came out with a new report, and it says that in terms of hourly wages and compensation, the average government employee in the state and local sector makes 44% more than the average private sector worker. So that there's almost a 50% increase.
No, but Nick, that's grossly misleading. When you actually take education into account, so similar jobs with similar educational background, actually public sector employees make less than private sector employees.
Actually, that's not true on an hourly basis. So you're looking at aggregate statistics. You have to ask yourself who works more hours before you simply look at aggregates. Private sector workers work more hours, and so you can't just look at the aggregate comparison. You got to look at the hourly comparison. On an hourly basis, there is tremendously more compensation on the union side in government work.
So wait a minute. Now, you're saying tremendously more, but so I hear you on the hourly, and that's a fair point. And if you could email me those numbers, I'll take a look at them, right? But you are acknowledging that, in fact, based on educational background and that field, that in fact private workers for their salaries do get more than public workers.
If you take a look at salary apart from benefits, they're roughly equivalent. But once you roll in benefits, the government worker, even taking account into academic standing, is making dramatically more.
No, those numbers are not the numbers I've seen, Nick. The numbers I have seen.
Let me tell you about our research. Our research shows that the impact of collective bargaining laws costs taxpayers $50 billion in the aggregate across the country in state and local government. In Arizona alone, it's around $550 million a year because of the leverage that collective bargaining laws give government employees at a secret negotiation with the boss they can fire through the next election.
No, but you're throwing out numbers. No, wait a minute, Nick. When you're throwing out numbers about how much it costs, now, are you talking about as opposed to something, or are you saying, hey, you know what, in Arizona, of course you have to pay your government workers, whether they're cops, firemen, teachers, et cetera, and oh my God, you're paying them $50 billion. That has no context.
Well, no. Our research shows that if you follow the Virginia model, which has completely banned collective bargaining in the government sector, you will save $550 million a year after 7 years in a state like Arizona. Across the country, if everyone adopted the Virginia model, it would be around $50 billion a year every year.
Okay, now let me challenge that. Let me challenge that in two ways. First of all, it's interesting that you're choosing Virginia, because if you chose North Carolina, they don't have collective bargaining, and their budget deficit is 10% of their is projected to be 10% of their budget overall. And if you look at New York, for example, they do have collective bargaining. In fact, they're very highly unionized, and they actually have only 3.5% budget deficit. So without collective bargaining, North Carolina is in much worse shape. So look, Nick, the reality is, and I got to keep it real here, you work at the Goldwater Institute, and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but you guys are funded by the Koch brothers and you're funded by the Walton Foundation. So it's these large business interests that have a motivation to cherry pick one state and go, you see how much money we would save? In reality, it's money that, of course, the Koch brothers and the Walton family would save by making sure that their workers don't get paid that much.
Actually, none of that's true. It's kind of funny that you guys all think we're so powerful and so well-funded, but let's just let you guys imagine that conspiracy. The bottom line is our research shows that collective bargaining in the government sector exploits taxpayers, and the only way that taxpayers can be adequately protected is if you prohibit government sector collective bargaining.
Now, you said it's a conspiracy, et cetera. So do you tell me the facts then, right? Because the Goldwater Institute is not funded by taxpayers. You keep saying you're looking out for taxpayers. And I'm not saying it should be, but it's not. So who is it funded by? Do the Waltons and the Koch brothers give money to it, or don't they?
Not to my knowledge, but we'd sure accept the money if it came in. Look, we're mainly supported by individuals, and for the most part, they don't want their identities known because of the political retaliation taking on controversial issues like this might entail. You may recall in the 1960s, they tried to get the membership lists of the NAACP, and there is a real important privacy interest that's defended when you don't identify people or part of your organization.
But, Nick, when you have rich individuals, and by the way, our reporting shows that it is Koch and the Walton family, but okay, you're saying it's not. And I just want to give the audience both sides of that equation. But when you have rich individuals that you don't disclose funding this, it might be to their great interest to make sure that unions are incredibly weak throughout the country. Don't you think it's relevant for people to know that as you give them the Virginia model in your reporting?
No, because unions are dangerous, particularly government sector unions. I mean, look at all the violence that was threatened in Wisconsin. People have a real reason to want to maintain their privacy when we take stances on controversial issues like this. Look, we're trying to say that we should take away collective bargaining in the government sector, and that will result in savings to taxpayers of $550 million a year. That's not chump change. People probably don't want to be made out into targets for the kind of retaliation that was threatened during the hearing. I mean, the union leaders at the hearing on the bills promised a firestorm in response to this. If there isn't a case for confidentiality in this situation, I don't know what there would be.
I know. The poor Koch brothers, they are so beleaguered. And the Walton family, which, by the way, 6 of Sam Walton's descendants have the same amount of wealth as 100 million Americans combined. They're the people that are really beleaguered in this country, and it's a good thing to look out for them. But, Nick, one last question for you. Look, if you don't have collective bargaining, to get back to the main issue here, what power does anybody have, whether it's, again, a private or a public employee? When you go in to your boss and say, hey, I'd like dental or something, I mean, they're going to laugh you out of the room. Don't you see the enormous downside of that if you actually care about the average worker?
Well, two things. First, we're only talking about government sector collective bargaining. Private sector.
So is it okay to screw over the guys who work for the government? I mean, just because they work for the government, they can't have any power. They got to take whatever their boss tells them to.
No, they should trade on the value they offer, and they shouldn't use laws to give them an unfair advantage that sticks it to the taxpayer.
Look, again, we've had tremendous disagreement over facts and numbers, although you've not acknowledged some of the things that I've said here. So I don't see this tremendous advantage you're talking about, given all the facts that I gave you. But forget that. I'm saying, okay, look at the other side of it. So what chance does that guy have, that average worker have, if there's no collective bargaining? Isn't he just at the mercy of his boss? He can't do a damn thing about it?
No, because there's plenty of governments competing for their employees. And on top of that, look, if you want to pursue your personal self-interest to your maximum extent and you want to join a union to do that, the private sector has plenty of opportunities for you. If you join the government, you're supposed to have a primary obligation to the citizenry as a whole. Your own personal self-interest should be subordinate to that. And that's one cultural change banning collective bargaining will help achieve.
I love the idea of people signing up and say, hey, you know what? I'd love it if all jobs worked like this. It'd be hilarious. Hey, you know what? My personal interest, I don't care about my salary. You want to pay me $2, you want to pay me $4, I don't care. I am here to serve you. I don't think that's how the real world works. And as a conservative, Nick, I don't think you think that's how the real world works. But
it should. And if we can get rid of government sector collective bargaining, we'll move closer to that. Look, public
that sounds like communism.
That
sounds like communism, not capitalism. Oh, just do all the work you can, and then, hey, listen, if your boss decides to give you less money, then you just take it. That's okay, according to your needs.
Look, government sector employees have an unfair advantage when the law forces the government employer to engage in secret negotiations with no taxpayer at the table, and then they can turn around and stick it to the taxpayer. He's got no place to go. He's not like a customer of, say, GM who doesn't have to buy the Chevy Volt. They're stuck there. There's taxpayers. So there's an inherent disloyalty between government sector union collective bargaining and the obligation a government agent has to have to the general citizenry. They're not putting the citizenry first.
All right, I am going to give you the last word on that, Nick, and I really appreciate you coming on to have this conversation. You can check out Nick Dranias at the Goldwater Institute. He's their constitutional policy director. And like I said, look, everybody keep an open mind. Nick and I agree on a lot of things. On this, we obviously disagree. But again, I want to thank you for joining us, Nick.